The snow fell like a whispered secret over New York City, blanketing the streets in a hush that smothered sound and warmth alike. It was January 2025, and a historic blizzard dubbed Winter's Reckoning by meteorologists had descended, paralyzing the city with its icy grip. In Manhattan's financial district, skyscrapers gleamed under the storm's pale glow, their glass facades reflecting the wealth that pulsed within. But in the shadowed alleys and forgotten corners, the cold was a predator, stalking those who had nowhere to hide. On a solitary bench in a small park near Wall Street, a figure sat motionless, her navy blue uniform barely visible beneath a crust of frost. She was a speck of humanity in a city that rarely paused to notice. Her name was Emma Larson. For 3 years, Emma, 32, had been a maid in the Upper East Side mansion of Henry Caldwell, a millionaire whose name was synonymous with real estate empires and ruthless ambition. To Henry, Emma was little more than a shadow punctual. Silent, efficient. She polished his marble floors, brewed his morning tea, and ensured the fireplace glowed before he descended the grand staircase each day. Beyond that, she was invisible. He never wondered where she went after her shift or what burdens she carried beneath her crisp apron. To him, she was a function, not a person. Emma's life was a stark contrast to the opulence she tended. Born in a fading Ohio town, she had come to New York with dreams of becoming a nurse. Those dreams had crumbled under the weight of her mother's heart condition and her younger brother's needs. Every dollar she earned, $15 an hour, minus taxes, went to hospital bills and school supplies for 16-year-old Noah back home. Rent in New York had skyrocketed, with studio apartments in Brooklyn now averaging $3,000 a month, a figure that mocked her paycheck. For months, Emma had survived by sleeping in the mansion's laundry room, curling up on a pallet of towels in a corner where the hum of the dryer was her only company. It was a secret she guarded fiercely, her pride too. Strong to beg for help, the city's housing crisis had tightened its chokehold in recent years. Reports flooded the news, shelters overflowed, waitlists for public housing stretched into years, and evictions surged as landlords capitalized on gentrification. Emma had tried to find a room to rent, but her income disqualified her from affordable housing programs, yet couldn't cover market rates. She was trapped in a system that seemed designed to discard people like her. Each night, she'd slip into the laundry room after the other staff left, praying no one would notice. By day, she wore a smile, her hands steady as she dusted Henry's priceless art collection. But the strain was etching lines into her face, and her eyes, once bright, now held a quiet resignation. Henry Caldwell, 55, lived in a world where such struggles were unimaginable. His mansion, a Beaux-Arts masterpiece, sprawled across a corner lot, its iron gate shielding him from the city's chaos. Divorced a decade ago, Henry shared little with his daughter, Sophie, a 25-year-old artist who lived in Brooklyn and rarely called. His days revolved around boardrooms and bottom lines, his empire built on skyscrapers and luxury condos that reshaped Manhattan's skyline. But his latest project, a towering development in Harlem, had sparked outrage. Community groups accused him of displacing low-income families, and lawsuits threatened to stall the deal. The headlines stung, but Henry brushed them off. To him, progress meant profit, and sentimentality was a luxury he couldn't afford. That morning, Henry was already on edge. A crucial meeting with investors loomed, and the Harlem project's legal battles had kept him awake. Snow piled against the mansion's windows, and the city's travel advisories warned of gridlock. When Emma arrived 10 minutes late, her coat dusted with snow and her hands trembling from a sleepless night on the phone with her mother's doctor, Henry barely looked up from his tablet. Her apology, soft, earnest, was met with a curt wave of his hand. "You're done," he said, his voice as cold as the wind outside. "Leave. Emma froze, her breath catching. She searched his face for a trace of mercy, but found only impatience. Her heart sank, not for herself, but for Noah, who needed her to keep sending money, and her mother, whose next surgery depended on it. She wanted to explain the hospital, the storm, the exhaustion, but pride sealed her lips. She nodded, her eyes stinging, and turned toward the door. The butler, a kind older man named Marcus, slipped her a $20 bill as she left, his face heavy with pity. It was all he could do. Emma stepped into the blizzard, her thin uniform offering little against the wind that sliced through her. The mansion's warmth faded behind her, replaced by a city that felt like a stranger. She clutched her phone, its battery at 5%, and tried to call a friend from her old waitressing job, but the line went dead before it connected. Shelters, she knew, were beyond capacity. The news had reported lines wrapping around blocks. Penn Station was too risky. Police patrolled, shooing away anyone who lingered. With nowhere to go, Emma wandered, her sneakers soaking through as she passed glittering storefronts and hurried commuters. The $20 wouldn't buy a bus ticket to Ohio, let alone a night in a motel. By late afternoon, her legs ached and the cold had burrowed into her bones. She found herself in a small park near Wall Street, its benches empty under the storm's assault. The park was a relic, squeezed between towering banks, a place where traders smoked and tourists snapped photos. Emma sank onto a bench, her body too heavy to keep moving. Just a moment, she whispered to herself, pulling her arms tight against her chest. The snow settled on her shoulders, her hair, her eyelashes, each flake a quiet weight. She thought of Noah's laugh, her mother's frail hand squeezing hers during their last visit. Her eyes fluttered, heavy, as the cold tightened its grip. Unbeknownst to her, a jogger paused across the street, his phone raised. He snapped a photo of the woman on the bench, her form ghostly under the snow, and posted it to X with a caption, "Another soul forgotten in #NYC homeless." The post would spread, but not yet. For now, Emma was alone, her breath slowing, her body slipping toward a dangerous edge. The city moved on, indifferent, as the storm buried her in silence. Henry, meanwhile, sat in his study, oblivious to the woman he'd cast out. His phone buzzed with updates. The meeting was rescheduled, the storm worsening. He poured a scotch, staring out at the snow that obscured his view of Central Park. A flicker of unease stirred Emma's face, fleeting as she'd left, but he pushed it aside. There were always more maids, more workers to fill the gaps. He didn't know that the woman who'd kept his world running was now fighting for her life, or that their paths were about to collide in a way that would unravel everything he thought he knew. The snow fell heavier now, a relentless curtain that turned New York streets into a maze of white. Emma Larson trudged through the storm, her thin navy blue uniform clinging to her skin, soaked and useless against the wind that howled off. The Hudson. It was late afternoon on January 7th, 2025, and the blizzard winter's reckoning, as the news called it, had shut down subways and stranded buses, leaving the city in a state of suspended chaos. Emma's sneakers, worn thin from months of double shifts, squelched with every step, the icy water numbing her toes. The $20 Marcus had pressed into her hand burned in her pocket, a fleeting lifeline in a city that priced survival. Out of her reach, Emma's breath puffed out in shallow clouds, her chest tight from the cold and the weight of what had just happened. Fired. The word echoed in her mind, sharp as the wind. She'd been late 10 minutes, a sim born of a frantic call with her mother's doctor in Ohio. The hospital had demanded payment for a new round of tests, and Emma had spent the night pleading for a payment plan, her voice cracking over a voice demodioed. Borrowed phone in the mansion's laundry room. Henry Caldwell's dismissal had been swift, his eyes barely lifting from his tablet. No questions, no second chances. Now, with nowhere to go, Emma felt the city closing in, its towering buildings like sentinels watching her fade. She needed shelter, a plan, anything. Her phone was dead, its screen black as the hope draining from her. She tried calling Sarah, a friend from her old waitressing days at a diner in Queens, but the battery gave out before the call connected. Emma knew the shelters were her best bet, but the news had been grim. Every major shelter in Manhattan was over capacity, a consequence of the housing crisis that had pushed thousands onto the streets. In 2024 alone, New York City reported a 20% spike in homelessness, with shelters turning away families as temperatures plummeted. Emma had seen the lines on the news. People wrapped in blankets, waiting for a bed that never came. Still, she had to try. Her first stop was a shelter on 28th Street, a low brick building with a flickering neon sign. The line stretched around the corner, a mix of men, women, and children huddling under makeshift hoods of plastic bags and scarves. Emma joined them, her teeth chattering as she waited. The wind stung her face, and she tucked her hands under her armpits, trying to preserve what little warmth she had. A woman in front of her, clutching a toddler, turned and offered a tired smile. "First time here?" she asked, her voice hoarse. Emma nodded, her throat too tight to speak. The woman's eyes softened. "They're full. Been full since yesterday. But you can try." Her words landed like a stone in Emma's stomach. When her turn came, the shelter worker, a harried man in a worn jacket, confirmed it. "No beds, no space. Try the Bronx. Maybe they've got something." The Bronx was miles away, and Emma had no way to get there. She stepped back into the storm, the rejection settling like frost on her skin. Next, she tried Penn Station, hoping to blend into the crowd and stay warm until she could think straight. But the station was a fortress of suspicion. Security guards patrolled, their flashlights cutting through the dimness, ushering out anyone who looked like they didn't belong. Emma's uniform still emblazoned with the Caldwell crest drew. Stairs. A guard approached, his tone clipped. "Move along, miss. No loitering." She wanted to scream that she wasn't loitering, that she had nowhere to go, but the words wouldn't come. She shuffled out, the station's heat fading behind her as the cold reclaimed her dot by dusk. Emma's body ached, her legs heavy from hours of walking. The $20 could buy a coffee, maybe a sandwich, but what then? A bus ticket to Ohio cost at least $80, and even that wouldn't get her to her mother's bedside before morning. She thought of Noah, her 16-year-old brother, who texted her last week about a science fair he'd won. "You're my hero, Em," he'd written. The memory brought a flicker of warmth, but it was quickly snuffed out by the wind. She couldn't let him down, not when he was counting on her to keep their family afloat. Emma's steps slowed as she reached the Bowery, a street where the city's underbelly was laid bare. A group of people huddled around a metal barrel, flames licking up from burning cardboard. One of them, a man with a graying beard and a tattered coat, waved her over. "Come warm up," he said, his voice rough but kind. Emma hesitated, her pride warring with her desperation, but the fire's glow was too tempting. She joined them, holding her hands over the flames. The group shared a thermos of weak coffee, passing it to her without question. "Storms, eh?" "Killer," the man said, nodding at the sky. "They say 3 people froze last night." Emma's stomach twisted. She didn't want to be a statistic. The group's stories echoed her own. Evictions, job losses, medical bills that crushed dreams. One woman, a former teacher, spoke of losing her apartment when her landlord raised the rent by $500 overnight. A common tale in a city where median rents had climbed to $3,200 by 2025. Emma listened, her heart heavy but oddly comforted by their shared struggle. For a moment, she wasn't alone. But the fire dwindled, and the group dispersed, each returning to their own fight for survival. Emma thanked them, slipping the thermos back to the man, and moved on, her body trembling now not just from cold, but from hunger. She found herself in a small park near Wall Street, its iron gates dwarfed by the skyscrapers looming above. Park was deserted, its benches coated in snow, the air thick with silence. Emma sank onto one, her legs giving out. "Just a minute," she whispered, her voice swallowed by the storm. She pulled her arms tight, trying to trap warmth that wasn't there. Her mind drifted to Ohio, to the summer days when she and Noah would chase fireflies, to her mother's laughter before the illness took it away. She'd wanted to be a nurse, to heal people like her mom, but life had other plans. Now, all she could do was survive. The cold was insidious, creeping into her bones, dulling her senses. Her fingers, red and stiff, refused to bend. She tried to stand, to keep moving, but her body wouldn't obey. The snow settled on her shoulders, her hair, her eyelashes, each flake a tiny weight pulling her down. She thought of Noah's text. Again, his words a faint anchor. "I'll figure it out," she murmured, but her eyes were heavy, her breath slowing. She didn't see the jogger across the street, his phone raised, capturing her silhouette against the bench. He posted the image to X, a fleeting act of voyeurism. *NYC homeless. Another soul lost in the storm. The post began to spread, likes and retweets climbing, but Emma didn't know. She was slipping, the cold wrapping her in a dangerous embrace. Her head tilted, her lips parted, her breath a faint wisp in the air. She wasn't sleeping, not yet, but her body was shutting down. The hypothermia the doctors would later diagnose already taking hold. The city moved on, its pulse unbroken, while Emma Larson fought a silent battle on a bench no one noticed. Somewhere, in a mansion miles away, Henry Caldwell sipped his scotch, unaware that the woman he'd discarded was fighting for her life, and that her struggle would soon force him to confront his own. Henry Caldwell's breath clouded in the frigid air as he cut through the small park near Wall Street, his polished leather shoes crunching through the snow. It was January 8th, 2025, and the blizzard winter's reckoning had snarled New York City into chaos. Subways were stalled, roads impassable, and Henry's driver had texted an hour ago, stuck in a gridlock on the FDR Drive. With a crucial board meeting looming, Henry had no choice but to walk, a rare inconvenience for a man whose life was orchestrated to avoid such indignities. His navy cashmere coat offered little comfort against the wind that whipped through the skyscrapers, and his mind churned with numbers. The $200 million Harlem development, the lawsuits piling up, the investors demanding answers, the city's pulse felt distant, its struggles irrelevant to his world of glass towers and stock tickers. Henry's morning had been a storm of its own. The Harlem Project, a gleaming condo complex meant to redefine the neighborhood, had sparked protests from residents facing eviction. Community activists had plastered his name across X, calling him a vulture capitalist who profited off displacement. A local paper had run a piece that morning. Caldwell's empire, wealth built on ruins, with a photo of families picketing his site. Henry had skimmed it, his jaw tight, dismissing it as noise. He'd clawed his way out of a Brooklyn tenement 40 years ago, working 16-hour days to build his empire. Sentimentality didn't pay dividends, but the criticism stung more than he'd admit, and a text from his daughter, Sophie, had added salt to the wound. Dad, when did you stop caring about people? He hadn't replied. Now, as he hurried through the park, his eyes fixed on his watch, 8:47 a.m. 30 minutes to the meeting, something caught his peripheral vision. A shape on a bench, dusted with snow, almost indistinguishable from the drifts piling around it. He slowed, annoyed at the distraction, assuming it was a pile of rags or a homeless person he'd rather avoid. New York had nearly 80,000 homeless. In 2025, a number splashed across headlines after last year's shelter funding cuts. Henry had never given it much thought. It was someone else's problem. But as he passed, the shape stirred a faint shift, a shadow of breath in the air. His steps faltered. The figure was a woman, her body slumped to one side, arms folded tightly, as if clutching herself against the cold. Her navy uniform, patched with snow, looked oddly familiar, the crest on her apron glinting faintly under the frost. Henry's heart gave a strange lurch. He stepped closer, his shoes sinking into the bottoms. Snow, and saw the headband, slightly askew, framing dark hair crusted with ice. His breath caught. "Emma?" he said, his voice barely audible over the wind. She didn't move. Henry crouched, his knees protesting, and peered at her face. Her lips were parted, tinged blue, her skin pale as the snow dusting her cheeks. Her breath was shallow, almost invisible. He reached out, his gloved hand hovering over her shoulder, then touched her. She was cold, too cold, like touching marble. "Emma," he barked, shaking her gently. Her head lolled, lifeless. Panic flared in his chest, a primal jolt unlike anything he'd felt closing a 9-figure deal or facing a boardroom mutiny. This was different, raw, human. Henry looked around, the park a desolate white void. The morning rush hadn't started. The city was still paralyzed by the storm. No joggers, no dog walkers, just the relentless snow and the woman he'd fired yesterday morning. His mind flashed to that moment, her red-rimmed eyes, her trembling hands, her apology he'd ignored. "You're done," he'd said, his voice a blade. He hadn't asked why she was late, hadn't cared. Now, she was here, on this bench, slipping away, and the weight of that indifference hit him like a physical blow. He fumbled for his phone, his fingers clumsy in the cold. 911, he snapped when the operator answered. "There's a woman in a park near Wall Street, hypothermic, I think. She's not responding. Hurry." He gave the cross streets, his voice sharp but unsteady. As he waited, he knelt beside her, brushing snow from her arms, her face, her hair. Her headband navy, like her uniform, had slipped, revealing a streak of gray at her temple. She looked younger than he'd remembered, fragile, like someone who'd been carrying too much for too long. He didn't know her age, her story, her dreams. He'd never asked. The realization twisted in his gut. Emma had been in his home for 3 years, brewing his tea at 6 a.m., folding his shirts with precision, polishing the silver until it gleamed. He'd seen her every day, yet never seen her. A memory flickered, her standing by the kitchen window last spring, smiling faintly at the cherry blossoms outside. He'd walked past, his mind on a conference call. Now, that smile haunted him. A ghost of someone he'd let slip through his fingers. Sirens wailed in the distance, growing louder. Henry's coat was wet. His knees ached, but he didn't move. He kept brushing snow from Emma, as if the act could undo what he'd done. His phone buzzed his assistant, reminding him of the meeting, but he silenced it. For the first time in years, his mind wasn't on profit margins or stock prices. It was on her, the woman he'd cast out without a second thought. The ambulance screeched to a stop, its red lights cutting through the snow. Paramedics leapt out, their boots sinking as they ran toward the bench. "What happened?" one asked. A woman with a clipped tone, already checking Emma's pulse. Henry stammered, I found her like this. She worked for me. I didn't know she was here." The paramedic shot him a glance, her eyes narrowing, but said nothing. They lifted Emma onto a stretcher, her body limp, and bundled her in thermal blankets. "Severe hypothermia," the woman said, her voice grim. "She's lucky you found her. Another hour, and we'd be calling the coroner." The words landed like a punch. Henry followed the stretcher, his legs moving on instinct. The paramedics worked quickly, hooking Emma to monitors, their hands steady despite the cold. "She's stable, but barely," the second paramedic said, a man with a Brooklyn accent. "You know her?" Henry nodded, his throat tight. "Yeah, her name's Emma Larson." The man raised an eyebrow. "You don't sound sure." Henry didn't respond. He climbed into the ambulance, ignoring the paramedic's skeptical look. As they sped toward Bellevue Hospital, the city blurred outside, a monochrome smear of snow and steel. Inside, the monitors beeped faintly, Emma's face half hidden by an oxygen mask. Henry sat rigid, his hands clasped, his mind racing. He thought of Sophie's text. Asterisk, when did you stop caring about people? He'd grown up in a cramped apartment, his mother scrubbing floors to feed him, his father gone before he was 10. He'd vowed to escape that life, and he had building an empire, brick by brick. But somewhere along the way, he'd stopped. Seeing the people who kept it running, the ambulance hit a pothole, jarring him back. He looked at Emma, her chest rising faintly under the blankets. She wasn't just a maid. She was someone's daughter, maybe someone's sister, someone who'd smiled at blossoms while he looked away. The paramedic's words echoed. Asterisk, another hour, and we'd be calling the coroner. Asterisk, Henry's hands shook. Not from the cold, but from a truth he couldn't dodge. He'd nearly let her die. Not by malice, but by neglect, a sin that felt heavier with every beep of the monitor dot as the ambulance pulled into the hospital's bay. Henry stepped out, his coat heavy with melted snow. He followed the stretcher through the emergency room. Doors, the fluorescent lights harsh against his eyes. Nurses swarmed, barking orders, wheeling Emma away. Henry stood frozen, a man out of place in his tailored suit, watching the woman he'd failed disappear down a sterile hall. For the first time in decades, he felt small, not the titan of industry, but a man staring down the cost of his own blindness. The fluorescent lights of Bellevue Hospital's emergency room buzzed overhead, casting a sterile glow that made Henry Caldwell's tailored suit look out of place, its navy fabric still damp with melted snow. It was January 8th, 2025, just past 9 a.m., and the blizzard outside winter's reckoning continued to choke New York City, piling snow against the hospital's glass doors. Inside, the air smelled of antiseptic and urgency, a world far removed from Henry's boardrooms and penthouses. He sat in a hard plastic chair beside Emma Larson's bed, his hands clasped tightly, his knuckles white. The monitors beeped steadily, their rhythm a fragile tether to the woman he'd nearly let die. Emma lay unconscious, her face pale beneath an oxygen mask, 4 lines snaking from her arm. Her navy uniform had been replaced with a hospital gown, but the headband slightly askew, crusted with frost when he'd found her sat on the bedside table, a quiet reminder of who she was. The nurse, a brisk woman named Carla, had delivered. The diagnosis: severe hypothermia, compounded by exhaustion and malnourishment. She was minutes from organ failure, Carla said, her eyes flicking to Henry with a mix of curiosity and judgment. "You're lucky you found her when you did." Henry nodded, his throat too tight to speak. Lucky wasn't the word. Guilty was. The image of Emma on that bench snow-dusted, lifeless looped in his mind, each replay sharpening the knife of his regret. He'd fired her yesterday, a snap decision born of stress and indifference. 10 minutes late and he'd cast her out without a question, without a thought. He hadn't known she was sleeping in his mansion's laundry room, sending every dollar to her family in Ohio. He hadn't known she had nowhere to go. Now, as the monitors beeped and nurses moved through the curtain bay, Henry sat frozen, a man whose empire felt meaningless in the face of this one failure. His phone vibrated. A cascade of missed calls. His assistant, board members, investors furious about the delayed Harlem project meeting. The $200 million development was teetering, lawsuits mounting from displaced residents, and X was ablaze with hashtags like #Caldwell evicts. He ignored it all. Another message popped up. This one from Sophie, his daughter. Asterisk, Dad, you okay? Heard. About the storm. He stared at the screen, her words from yesterday echoing. When did you stop caring about people? He typed a reply, then deleted it. What could he say? That he'd let a woman freeze because he hadn't bothered to see her? Carla returned, checking Emma's chart. You're still here, she said, her tone neutral but pointed. Most people would have left by now. Henry met her gaze, his voice low. Not most people. She raised an eyebrow, unconvinced. You're Henry Caldwell, right? The real estate guy? He nodded, bracing for the inevitable. Saw your name in the news. Folks aren't happy about that Harlem deal. She paused, then added, Hope you're here for her, not for headlines. The comment stung, but Henry couldn't deny its truth. In 2025, public distrust of wealthy philanthropists was at a fever pitch, fueled by exposes of performative charity and tax-dodging foundations. Ex-posts regularly skewered billionaires for photo-op altruism, and Henry's name had trended for all the wrong reasons. He wanted to tell Carla he wasn't here for clout, that something in him had cracked when he saw Emma on that bench. But words felt hollow. Actions would have to speak. He stood, approaching the nurse's station. Her bills, he said quietly. Send them to me, all of them. The clerk blinked, then nodded, handing him a form. As he signed, he overheard Carla muttering to a colleague, Bet it's a PR stunt. Henry's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. He didn't care what they thought. Not yet. Back at Emma's bedside, he studied her face, searching for the woman he'd ignored for 3 years. She was 32. He learned from her chart younger than he'd guessed. Her file noted an emergency contact in Ohio, a Linda Larson. Likely her mother. Henry's mind drifted to his own mother, who'd scrubbed floors to raise him, her hands raw from bleach. He'd sworn to escape that life, and he had, but at what cost? Emma had been right under his nose, suffering in silence. And he'd never noticed. He pulled out his phone, dialing his assistant, Rachel. Find out everything about Emma Larson, he said. Her family, her background, anything in our records. And get me a contact for a real estate agent in Ohio. Rachel hesitated, unused to such requests. Sir, the board's furious about the meeting. Handle it, he snapped, then softened. Please. This is more important. He hung up, his gaze returning to Emma. For the first time in years, his priorities were shifting, though he couldn't yet name why. Hours passed. The storm raging outside. Rachel emailed a dossier. Emma Larson, born in Canton, Ohio. Mother, Linda, hospitalized with heart failure. Brother Noah, 16, a high school junior. Emma had listed no permanent address, only a PO box. A note from HR revealed she'd requested reduced hours last month, citing family issues, but Henry had never seen it. Another detail hit harder. Security logs showed late-night entries to the laundry room, unexplained until now. She'd been living there, in his mansion, and he'd been blind to it. The weight of it pressed on his chest. He thought of Sophie, her art studio in Brooklyn, her insistence on living modestly despite his wealth. She'd accused him of losing his humanity, and he'd brushed it off. Now, he couldn't. He texted her. Asterisk, I'm at Bellevue. Found someone in trouble. I need to make this right. Sophie replied instantly. Do more than talk, Dad. Prove it. Asterisk, her words were a challenge. When he couldn't ignore Emma stirred around noon, her eyelids fluttering. Henry leaned forward, his breath catching. Her lips moved beneath the mask, dry and cracked. Noah? She whispered, her voice a rasp. Henry's heart sank. She was calling for someone. Maybe her brother, not him. Emma, he said softly. It's Henry. You're in the hospital. You're safe." Her eyes opened, clouded with confusion, then sharpened as they found his face. She flinched, her hand twitching as if to pull away. "Why are you here?" she croaked, her voice fragile but edged with distrust. Henry swallowed, his words clumsy. "Because I found you. In the park. I didn't know." Her brows furrowed, tears pooling in her eyes. She turned her face toward the wall, her breath hitching. "I wasn't late. On purpose. I never." She trailed off, exhaustion overtaking her. Henry nodded, his voice thick. "I know. I should've. Asked why. That's on me, Emma. Not you." She didn't respond, her eyes fixed on the wall. Henry stayed, the silence heavy but necessary. Carla checked in, noting Emma's vitals were improving. "She's tough," she said, her tone softer now, "but she need time." Henry nodded, his resolve hardening. Time was the least of what he owed her. By evening, he made a call to his lawyer, instructing him to lease an apartment near Bellevue for Emma's family. 2 bedrooms, furnished, close to a hospital, he said, and arranged transport from Ohio. Now, the lawyer, accustomed to Henry's demands, didn't question it. Next, Henry contacted the hospital's billing office, ensuring Emma's care was fully covered, including rehab if needed. These were first steps, not absolution, but they felt right as night fell. The storm began to ease, the snow slowing to a gentle drift. Henry stood by the window, watching the city emerge from its white shroud. His phone buzzed a news alert about the Harlem Project, another protest planned. He thought of Emma, of the families he'd displaced, of Sophie's challenge. He wasn't sure what redemption looked like, but he knew it started here, with the woman he'd failed. He returned to her bedside, his suit rumpled, his face lined with something new. Purpose. Emma slept now, her breathing steadier. Henry sat, his hands clasped, vowing to stay until she woke again. He didn't know her story, not yet, but he would learn it. Not as her boss, but as a man who'd seen, for the first time, the cost of looking away. The morning sun filtered through the heavy drapes of the guest room in Henry Caldwell's Upper East Side mansion, casting soft gold across the hardwood floor. It was January 12th, 2025, 4 days after Emma Larson had been pulled from a snow-dusted bench near Wall Street, her body on the brink of surrender to the blizzard's cruelty. The room was a far cry from the cramped laundry corner where she'd spent months hiding, a breath mingling with the hum of dryers. Now, a 4-poster bed cradled her, its linens crisp and warm, and a tray of untouched toast and tea sat on the nightstand. Emma, still pale but regaining color, stared at the ceiling, her hands folded over the quilt. For the first time in years, she was warm, but the weight of survival lingered in her chest. The hospital had released her yesterday, her hypothermia treated, her strength slowly returning. Henry had insisted she stay in the mansion's guest wing, not as a maid, but as a guest. To recover, he'd said, his voice softer than she'd ever heard. Emma had resisted, her pride a stubborn shield, but the hospital bill's thousands she'd never repay loomed like a shadow. So she'd agreed, her eyes wary, her heart unsure. The room felt like a dream, its walls adorned with art she'd once dusted, its silence unbroken by the clatter of her old life. But dreams, she knew, could unravel. A knock at the door broke her thoughts. Marcus, the butler who'd slipped her $20 the day she was fired, peeked in, his face creasing into a smile. "Your family's here, Miss Emma," he said, his voice warm. Emma's breath caught. Henry had arranged for her mother, Linda, and her brother, Noah, to fly from Ohio, leasing them an apartment near Bellevue Hospital. She hadn't seen them in a year, her visits replaced by money orders and late-night calls. She sat up, smoothing her borrowed sweater, her hands trembling with something between joy and fear. The door opened wider, and Noah burst in, all lanky limbs and a grin that hadn't changed since he was 10. He called, rushing to hug her. His warmth, his weight, grounded her, and she clung to him, tears spilling. Linda followed, slower, her heart condition etching lines into her face. She leaned on a cane, but her eyes sparkled as she reached for Emma's hand. "My girl," she whispered, her voice thick. Emma held them both, the room blurring through her tears. For a moment, the years of sacrifice, the skipped meals, the nights in the laundry room felt worth it. Henry had stayed out of sight, giving them space, but his presence lingered in the gesture. The apartment, a modest 2-bedroom in a building he'd quietly secured, was a short walk from the hospital where Linda would continue treatment. Noah, wide-eyed, told Emma about the flight, the city's lights from the plane, the new school he'd start next week. "It's like a movie, he said, his voice bright. "Mr. Caldwell said he's covering everything." Emma's smile faltered. She was grateful, but gratitude warred with suspicion. Men like Henry didn't change overnight, did they? Downstairs, Henry was reshaping his world. That morning, he'd gathered his household staff, cooks, gardeners, cleaners, in the mansion's grand dining room, its chandelier glinting above. The air was tense, the staff exchanging glances, unused to such meetings. Henry stood at the head of the table, his suit less pristine than usual, his face etched with something raw. "I made a mistake," he began, his voice steady but heavy. "I fired Emma Larson without knowing her story. She was living in our laundry room, sending every dollar to her family, and I didn't see it. She almost died because of me." The room was silent, forks stilled, eyes wide. Maria, a cook who'd worked for Henry for a decade, dabbed her eyes. Marcus nodded, his expression one of quiet respect. Henry continued, "I'm setting up a fund for staff in need, medical, housing, emergencies. No one should suffer in silence. Here," he paused, meeting their gazes. "I'm sorry. I should have done better." The apology, raw and unpolished, hung in the air. It was a first for Henry, a man who'd built skyscrapers, but never bridges to his own people. The fund, he explained, would be seeded with $500,000, diverted from his Harlem project's budget, a decision that sent ripples through his boardroom. The project, already under fire for displacing families, was now a lightning rod for his own reckoning. Ex-posts had begun to circulate, some praising his hospital vigil, others calling it a stunt. Asterisk, Caldwell's playing savior now? One read, with thousands of retweets. Henry ignored them, his focus on the mansion. He'd asked Marcus to survey the staff, to learn who else was struggling. The answers: overdue rents, medical debts, stunned him. His empire had thrived, but his people had not. Emma, unaware of. The meeting spent the day with her family. Noah sprawled on the guest room floor, sketching the city skyline on a notepad Henry had provided. Linda rested in an armchair, her breathing easier in the warm room. Emma watched them, her heart full, but guarded. She thought of her old dream to be a nurse, to heal people like her mother. It had faded under the grind of survival, but now, in this quiet room, it flickered again. She wondered if she could trust Henry's change, or if this was charity with strings. That evening, Henry knocked softly on her door. He carried a tray tea, chamomile, the way she'd once brewed it for him. "May I?" he asked, his voice hesitant. Emma nodded, surprised by his awkwardness. He set the tray down, his hands fumbling. "I wanted to check on you," he said, "and to listen, if you'll let me." Emma studied him, his eyes tired but earnest. She told him about Ohio, about her mother's laugh before the illness, about Noah's science fair trophies. Henry listened, really listened, his usual impatience gone. When she mentioned her nursing dreams, he leaned forward. "Why didn't you pursue it?" he asked. Emma's voice hardened. "Life doesn't wait for dreams. bills due. Henry nodded, his face shadowed. I should have seen that, he said. I'm learning, Emma, slowly. She didn't reply, but the tea warmed her hands and the gesture small. Human felt like a start. Over the next days, Emma grew stronger, walking the mansion's halls, no longer a shadow but a presence. The staff greeted her with quiet warmth, Maria slipping her extra scones, Marcus sharing stories of his own children. Henry checked in daily, not as a boss, but as a man trying to understand. He told her about his mother, a cleaner like Emma, who'd raised him alone. I forgot where I came from, he admitted one evening, the city's lights glinting outside. You reminded me. Emma wasn't ready to forgive, not fully, but she saw something in Henry, a crack in the armor of a man who'd once been untouchable. She thought of Noah, now enrolled in a magnet school, and Linda, scheduled for surgery with costs covered. The apartment, the care, the chance to breathe, it was more than she'd had in years. But she held her pride close, determined to rebuild on her own terms. Henry, meanwhile, was rethinking his empire. He met with his lawyer, redirecting funds to support displaced Harlem families, a move that drew both praise and skepticism online. He didn't care about the noise. For the first time, he was acting not for profit, but for people. Emma's presence, her quiet strength, was the catalyst, and he wasn't done proving it. The ballroom of Henry Caldwell's Upper East Side mansion shimmered under crystal chandeliers, their light dancing across polished floors and velvet-draped tables. It was January 20th, 2025, and the blizzard that had gripped New York City had finally retreated, leaving a city sparkling with fresh snow and cautious hope. Tonight, the mansion hosted a charity gala, its proceeds earmarked for a citywide initiative to combat homelessness, a cause that had surged in urgency after winter's reckoning claimed lives and headlines. Guests in tailored suits and glittering gowns filled the room, their murmurs mingling with the clink of champagne flutes. But the true center of the evening stood quietly at the edge of the crowd. Emma Larson, no longer a shadow, but a woman about to redefine the room. Emma wore a simple navy blue dress, its cut modest but elegant, her hair braided neatly, a nod to the headband she'd once worn as a maid. Her hands, once raw from scrubbing floors, now clasped a note card with a speech she'd written herself. She was nervous, her pulse quickening as she scanned the crowd: philanthropists, city officials, reporters whose cameras flashed like fireflies. 2 weeks ago, she'd been near death on a park bench. Now, she was here, her mother and brother, Linda and Noah, watching from a front-row table, their faces glowing with pride. Henry had made this possible, but Emma's presence was her own. Henry stepped to the microphone, his navy suit crisp, but his eyes softer than the man who'd once fired Emma without a glance. The room hushed. I built skyscrapers and called myself powerful, he began, his voice steady but laced with something raw. But I was blind to the people who kept my world turning. One woman, who served this house with quiet strength, taught me what power really means. She showed up, day after day, even when the world forgot her. He paused, his gaze finding Emma. Tonight, I'm not here to speak for her. I'm here to introduce her. The crowd turned, a ripple of curiosity spreading. Emma stepped forward, her step steady despite the tremor in her chest. She took the microphone, her voice soft but clear. I was a maid here, she said, the words cutting through the room's hum. I worked to keep my family alive, sending every dollar to my mother's hospital bills and my brother's future. When I lost this job, I had nowhere to go. I sat on a bench in the cold, thinking it was the end. Her eyes flickered to Henry, then back to the crowd. But it wasn't, because someone saw me, and because I kept fighting. The room was silent, then erupted in applause, not out of pity, but awe. Emma spoke of her dream to become a nurse, now reignited by a night course she'd enrolled in. funded by Henry's Staff Welfare Fund. She spoke of the thousands like her, invisible in a city of wealth, and urged the guests to act. "See the people around you," she said. "That's where change starts." As she stepped back, the crowd rose, their ovation echoing off the walls. Noah whooped, Linda dabbed her eyes, and Henry nodded, a quiet pride in his gaze. Henry returned to the microphone, his voice humbler now. "Emma's story changed me," he said. "I've redirected funds from my Harlem project to house displaced families and bolstered this fund for my staff. No one will slip through the cracks again, not on my watch." The announcement drew gasps, then cheers. Ex-Post later that night would call it a turning point, though skeptics still labeled it a PR move. Henry didn't care. He'd found something worth more than headlines: purpose. Emma's new role as Director of Staff Welfare across Henry's properties was no token gesture. She'd already begun meeting with employees, uncovering stories of overdue rents and medical debts, ensuring the fund reached those who needed it. Her first act was to secure raises for the mansion's staff, a move Henry approved without hesitation. She was also studying for her nursing exams, her evenings spent poring over textbooks, Noah quizzing her with flashcards. The dream she buried was alive again, and she carried it with the same grit that had kept her going through the storm. As the gala ended, Emma and Henry stood by the ballroom's window, the city skyline glittering beyond the snow. "You didn't have to do all this," Emma said, her voice quiet. Henry shook his head. "I did, and I'm not done." He spoke of plans to fund shelter expansions, inspired by Emma's ordeal and the city's 80,000 homeless. Emma nodded, her trust in him growing, though she'd never fully let go of her guard. She didn't need to. She was building her own path now. The story of Emma and Henry is a testament to the power of seeing the invisible. It reminds us that humanity thrives not in wealth or status, but in compassion and accountability. Emma's resilience, her refusal to break despite crushing odds, shows the strength of those who labor in the shadows. Henry's transformation, from a man blinded by ambition to one awakened by guilt, proves that change is possible, even in the hardest hearts. Their journey challenges us to look closer, to ask questions, to act before it's too late. In a world quick to judge and slow to understand, their story is a call to bridge the gap between privilege and struggle, to build a society where no one is left in the cold. If this story moved you, join Legacy Stories for more tales of resilience, redemption, and hope. Subscribe on our channel, share your thoughts below, and tell us where you're watching from. Your support keeps these stories alive, reminding us to stay kind, stay curious, and see the people around us. Until next time, keep believing in the power of second chances.